Hello, all of our participants. My name is Yael Osansky. I am Program Manager for European Students for Liberty, and you are tuned in to our first of our fall webinar series, and our first guest panelist will be Dr. Tom Palmer. Dr. Palmer is Executive Vice President for International Programs at the Atlas Network. He oversees the work of teams working around the world to advance the principles of classical liberalism, and he works with a global network of think tanks and research institutes, including this group, Students for Liberty. He's been very active with our group, not just here in Europe, but also in the United States, in North America, in South America, in Asia, and Africa, and he's hoping to conquer Australia very, very soon. He's also a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, and is also formerly vice president for international programs over there. He is himself an H.B. Earhart Fellow at Hertford College, Oxford University, and he was a vice president for Institute for Humane Studies at George Mason University. I shall now hand it away to Dr. Palmer, who will present on his new book, a book made in partnership with Students for Liberty, Why Liberty? Take it away, Dr. Palmer.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Students for Liberty is very near and dear to my heart. I've been recently, in just the last 2 months, at the Students for Liberty events in Hungary, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in South Africa, in Colombia, in the United States. And now it's a pleasure to be with our European friends. What I'd like to talk about is this project, Why Liberty? It's an exciting project to bring the ideas of mainly young classical liberals. Most of the authors are in university or just very recently out, and to share the ideas of liberty. We have brought together a number of different writers. It was a pleasure to work with them, dealing with really important and deep questions. So this is a book that we can learn from. I learned from the authors myself as the editor. That made it especially delightful for me, but also a great book to share with our friends and colleagues and family members and younger brothers and sisters as well. One of the themes that I wanted with the book was to explain that classical liberalism, or libertarianism in the American context, is really a philosophy of everyday life. It's about how most people live their lives. They behave as liberals or classical or libertarians in their daily lives. They don't go around hitting people. That's one of the things that you teach your children when they're very young. Keep your hands to yourself. Don't hit other people. You don't take things from other people that don't belong to you. Just confiscate them or smash the glass in stores if there are things that you'd like to have. And if we want services from other people, we don't just kidnap them. We don't point guns at them and drag them off and force them to wash our dishes or mow our lawn or provide other services. So in fact, most people have really embraced the values of libertarianism in their daily lives. The idea of enslaving another person is just so morally repugnant to the overwhelming majority of people. This way, libertarian ideas have had an enormous triumph over the centuries, because in previous centuries that did not seem strange to people. Slavery or coercion or murder seemed the normal course of events, but no longer. Our ideas have really influenced the world in a major way. In fact, most people are so libertarian that even if they really strongly disagree with another person about matters of the highest import, metaphysics and religion and the nature of human life, they don't kill them. They say, well, I disagree with you. You can go to the church or the religious establishment of your choice, and I'll go to the one I like, or to none at all. They don't use violence as a matter of course. That has been an astonishing achievement of the libertarian generations of the past. But we have a problem. Why is it that people don't embrace openly and explicitly the philosophy by which they live their lives? It's how people live. There's a disconnect between their behavior and their moral intuitions about everyday life and then political theory or political philosophy. I think the reason is most people have been misled into thinking that the state is supernatural. They have special rights and powers to do all those things that other people can't do. are not able to do. They're all-wise, all-knowing, they're perfectly benevolent, and our political rulers have these special powers to run the economy. You hear political leaders around the world, whether prime ministers or presidents, periodically say, I'm very busy running the country or running the economy, or I'm in charge of the country. And if that were true, that would be quite an astonishing set of responsibilities. But in fact, no one can run a country. The very concept is absurd and ridiculous. The country runs itself very substantially. At best, politicians or political leaders may be responsible for rules, but they can't actually direct and manage how a country is run. So we've got just a lot of work to do. It's important to us to demystify the state, to show it's not made up of magical people, but people that are just like you and me. They're no better, and sometimes even they're no worse than the rest of us. We need to be able to demonstrate that the simple rules by which we govern our lives are also the fundamental principles of societies as a whole. That when rights are well-defined, legally secure, and people can freely transact, they can create order much more sophisticated and complicated and satisfying than could have been directly created by politicians. Richard Epstein really summed it up in the title of what I think is really his best book, Simple Rules for a Complex World. Some people think that when you have more complexity, naturally you have to have more complex rules, but quite the contrary. When the rules become so complex people can't follow them, what you get is disorder and chaos. Now, one of the distinguishing features, in fact, the distinguishing feature of a classical liberal or libertarian is the belief that liberty is the primary political goal. It doesn't mean it's the only goal in life. That would be bizarre and strange. There's love and romance and friendship and achievement and art and all the other good things in life as well. But as a political goal, liberty is the primary one. It's the one that provides the framework for the achievement of all of the others. And moreover, the idea of the presumption of liberty. Just as in law you can talk about the presumption of innocence, it's impossible to prove that you are innocent of all the things you could possibly be charged with. The burden of proof is too great. Instead, if someone's going to charge you with a crime, the burden is on the one who makes the charge to prove that you're guilty, not the other way around. And similarly with the presumption of liberty. You shouldn't have to go, if you want to sing a song, to the Ministry of Music to get a permission for singing songs, or if you want to bake bread, to go to the Ministry of Baking to get bread baking permission. There should be a presumption you can do what you want, unless there's a sufficient reason to restrict you, and there might very well be. If the singing is so loud that it keeps all of your neighbors up or disrupts the lives of others, or if the baking generated sparks that burn down houses neighboring to you, then there are reasons to restrict your singing or your baking, but otherwise not. So the burden of proof is on the one who would restrict your freedom, not on you for exercising it. In one of the essays of the book, I talk about the mutually reinforcing elements of the classical liberal synthesis, and those are individual rights, that individual human beings have rights, that there are things others may not legitimately do to them. And of course, philosophers and theologians have discussed for hundreds of years what is the origin, what is the nature of those rights. Are they God-given, or are they a supervenient feature of the human condition, and so on. But the consensus, regardless of differing views of the foundation, is that every individual human being is unique, is special, and has rights. They command the respect of others. Now, of course, the response of opponents of that, of the advocates of absolute power, was there would be chaos. Well, here we draw on social science, and we've learned that, in fact, most of the order that governs the world is spontaneous. No one deliberately caused it or created it or imposed it on us, but rather it grows, it emerges. As they say in French, le monde va de lui-même. The world runs itself. And that's a very important insight that is complementary to the idea of individual rights. You can have individual rights and you get not chaos, but more social order. But then the third element is some system of law. Constitutionally limited government is the traditional classical liberal approach, but we could think more widely about that as well. Some system of law that helps us to define our rights so that we understand what is permissible and what is not, and that then protects it from aggression, from others who have tried to violate it, and facilitates mutual voluntary interaction and exchange. Those three elements are mutually reinforcing, a bit like a chair. If you had one with one leg, it's going to fall over. Two still fall over. But when you have three, each one will support the others. The purpose of law is to define and protect rights, not directly to create order. It's a very different conception of law that libertarians have from other views, from statist views. They believe that law is there to order society, literally order you like in the army. Do this, do that, do the other thing, to achieve predetermined goals. But the liberal understanding says that law is there to create the framework within which people then can freely generate order. Clark Rupert in the book has a very nice essay thinking about the political spectrum. Many people have argued over the years that the spectrum goes from an extreme right, which is fascism and one form of collectivism, to an extreme left, which is communism or Bolshevism, and another form of collectivism. Well, what a strange political spectrum that would be, where those are the two polar choices, two different flavors of the same toxic poison. If that's how people see the political spectrum, then we would have to say that classical liberalism is radically centrist. We don't have big plans and ideas about how everybody has to live, and we should force everyone or organize them in some military fashion to achieve what is the one proper end or goal of life. Rather, we believe in humility. We don't share the pretense that we know what's good for everyone else. Now, that idea of focusing on the rights of every individual human being as having an equal claim is quite old. And I like to cite here Marcus Tullius Cicero in his book on duties, who suggests this fundamental principle. We are all constrained by one and the same law of nature. And if that is true, then we are certainly forbidden by the law of nature from acting violently against another person. That's a nice summation of a core fundamental principle of liberalism. But it's not just a uniquely Western concept. Lao Tzu, the great Chinese sage or philosopher in the Tao Te Ching, in his great poem, argued that order emerges spontaneously. And this wonderful concept in Chinese of Wu Wei, which I've written up there in Chinese characters, is sometimes translated as inactivity. My Chinese friends insist that is incorrect. It should be understood as active inactivity, that the purpose of the law is to set the general rules, but then to stand back and let the order emerge from the participants in the social order. As he says, so long as I act only by inactivity, the people will of themselves become prosperous. It's a very beautiful statement of what is later articulated in different and perhaps less poetic form by Adam Smith. Now, one of the key elements is to understand that this is a worldwide movement. It's not limited to any continent or culture or language or place. Sometimes I annoy my conservative friends in Europe and the United States. They say, oh, I see you're defending Western ideas or Western values. And by that they mean toleration, freedom, justice, equal rights. But I point out, well, those are not all the ideas that have come from the West. We would have to include some others as well. Fascism, Mussolini was Italian. Communism, Karl Marx was German. Nationalism, socialism, other forms of injustice, slavery, war, and domination. Those are also part of the Western tradition, if you will. You can't just pick and choose the ones you like and say those are definitive of a tradition. Because all societies contain within themselves narratives of rights and freedom on the one hand, and also narratives of domination and coercion on the other. And the worldwide liberty movement is about identifying in every cultural context those ideas of liberty, reviving them, sharing them, spreading them, applying them, and in opposition to the ideas of domination and coercion and violence. So we see the growth of Students for Liberty around the world. This is really, to me, extremely exciting to see Students for Liberty in Latin America, in Africa, in Australia, in India, Brazil, Europe, North America, Canada, all over. It's, to me, one of the most heartening developments of the last 20 years. And to see the Students for Liberty members all around the world doing this is really buoys my heart tremendously to see that happening. Now, one of the things that distinguishes the libertarian approach is a recognition that no one is wise enough or smart enough or informed enough to run the whole world, to create and impose big plans for everyone. And I would think it's reasonable to say that classical liberals or libertarians are unique in this recognition and focusing on principles, institutions, and processes rather than wishful thinking or magic. Most people believe, oh, you have a value, just get it. Pass the law that says everyone will be employed or everything will be fair or what have you. But in fact, we rarely are able to actually choose outcomes, particularly when it is a matter of complex social organization. What we do get to choose are processes. And we want to choose the processes that we reasonably expect will yield the outcomes that we prefer. Classical liberals, in my opinion, are unique in understanding that. It's a very important insight based on social science. In addition, classical liberalism is a form of abolitionism. In the book, James Pantaleone, who's a graduate student in history at the College of William and Mary in the United States, has a delightful essay on the relationship of the movement to abolish slavery and to abolish the diminished citizenship that women had as a libertarian struggle. And he focuses on such great libertarian figures as Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest champions of liberty of the last 200 years, in my opinion. The key element about libertarianism is it really is the only political theory that supports equal freedom for everyone, regardless of nationality, language, religion, or other features of the human person. It's about believing in the freedom not only for yourself, but for other people. We are sometimes criticized by others as somehow selfish because we believe in freedom. But that, to me, makes no sense. I don't smoke marijuana, but I believe very passionately in the freedom of other people to make that choice and not to be subject to coercion and violence because of a nonviolent choice that they make. I'm not a member of any religious minorities in this regard, but I'm strongly in favor of their right to practice their religions peacefully and not be subject to domination. Joaquim Nabuco, a great Brazilian liberal, who was a diplomat, historian, and abolitionist, dedicated his whole life to the eradication of slavery. It took many decades. It was the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish that evil. And his book on abolitionism, he put it very nicely. I think it's a great liberal creed. We should he said, educate your children, educate yourselves, and the love for the freedom of others. For only in this way will your own freedom not be a gratuitous gift from fate. You will be aware of its worth and will have the courage to defend it. To be a liberal is to believe in the freedom of other people. That's very important insight. Now, at the same time that liberalism is breathtakingly radical, it's humble. Adam Powell has a very nice essay in the book on the humble case for liberty. And I really recommend that, dealing with the idea of virtue and virtue ethics within a libertarian context. It's about the liberty to realize objectives of our own choice and to recognize that for everyone. József Eötvös, one of the great Hungarian liberals of the 19th century, talked about the state in which people can use both their own abilities and the natural forces in their environment to achieve objectives of their own choice within the limits of the possible. Eötvös is really a very important figure in the liberal tradition, and I'm particularly happy that the Students for Liberty Club in Budapest is the Eötvös Club. because it's important to tie our ideas to the local heroes, and Eötvös was also a great Hungarian figure in the literary revival of the 19th century. Now, following on that, of course, F.A. Hayek from nearby Austria talked about the liberty of the unknown person. And I think that also was particularly interesting. What's important is not what freedom I personally would like to exercise, but what freedom some person may need in order to do things beneficial to society. This freedom we can assure to the unknown person only by giving it to all. It's about the freedom to do things I haven't even imagined, that haven't occurred to me, things that I don't really desire to do, but someone may desire to do that. And it's important to guarantee that freedom to everybody. Now, it's a theme that Martin Vega and Lotte Kosser, I put them an image there in one of their typical poses from a Students for Liberty event. In their essay on the book, they articulate this knowledge problem very well. They'll talk about it later. It's a really, really well-formulated introduction to that issue, and I think one of the best things written on this topic, because it's very clear and easy to understand. Sloane Frost has an essay in which she looks at the way in which interventionism piles on top of interventionism without being planned. Now, there's a fundamental misunderstanding that's very common among many people, that on the one hand you have planned society, socialism, and if it's not planned, it must be laissez-faire. But in fact, that does not exhaust the options. There can be unplanned interventionism as well, and that's what we get. One intervention causes one problem, and then they say, oh, we need another intervention for that. That causes another problem, another intervention for that. And the consequence of piling these on top of each other is a system that's kind of kept together with what I call the legal equivalent of string, tape, and paper clips. It's not planned, it's not coherent, it generates all kinds of crises, lurching from one problem to another, but it isn't laissez-faire. It isn't a free society. It's what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. There's also a chapter in the book on art. So often we focus on economic questions, and that was partly because of the challenge posed by socialists. They argued they could reorganize economies and economic transactions to be more rational and more productive than free markets, and libertarians had to respond to that very important challenge. But fundamentally, libertarianism isn't just about economics. It's about freedom of religion, it's about freedom of conscience, and it's about art. As Sarah points out, art can be disruptive. It'll create all kinds of new forms of order, new things that people hadn't thought about. And it demands that we think. She argues in the book that there's a very close connection between art and freedom, and I commend that essay to you. So let me just conclude with a thought that is very important to me, and that is the idea of freedom as a life project for everybody. You go through life, you acquire many commitments and projects. There are commitments in art, in commerce, in business, in science, family, romance, raising children, community, religion, all the different things that provide meaning to people's lives. And those deserve to be respected. So we do acquire all of these commitments. But among all of those commitments, I believe that there should be one place for one that will be a companion for a lifetime. Others may come and go at various times in life, but one that you can pursue when you're very young or when you're very old. And you will meet 96-year-old or even 102-year-old classical liberals and libertarians. Think about Ronald Coase, who just left us, producing his last book over the age of 100. A great life lived in the pursuit of scholarship and science, and also the pursuit of liberty. So that commitment, that lifelong project is liberty. And I'm so happy to work with Students for Liberty, because I know that long after I am dust and ashes, that they will be continuing this tradition of promoting liberty for everybody, not just for ourselves, but liberty for other people as well. Thank you, and it's been an honor to be here with you. and I look forward to hearing from Loda and Martin about their presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Palmer. That was Tom Palmer, who gave a great presentation on why liberty. And now we'd like to transition to the second part of the webinar with our ESFL Executive Board member, Lode Kosar. And we also have Martin Vega. They are both from the Rothbard Institute, and they are prepared to give a little presentation on their section in Why Liberty. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to them now.
Hi guys. As usual, it's been excellent. Also, thank you for helping us with the essay in the book. That was most appreciated. And now onwards to the essay. The title of the essay is How Do You Know Knowledge and the Presumption of Liberty? And it's basically a further extension and introduction to the knowledge problem that, amongst others, F.A. Hayek talked about. So what is the big problem that we try to tackle? The first thing is society is complex and difficult to grasp, right? The old philosopher, thinker, economist, journalist Frederick Bastiat said at one point in time, Paris gets fed. But he was responding to the socialists who say that social order can only be planned. But if you look at like big cities such as New York City, or in this case Hong Kong, millions of people live in that city and not much food is produced in that city, yet every day these millions of people get food. How is such a complexity possible? Or if you want to use another example, Leonard Reed talks about how to make a pencil in his article, I Pencil. And he talks about the amount of complexity that is necessary just to produce a simple pencil. You need rubber, you need paint, you need wood, you need graphite from all different places all across the world just to produce one simple pencil. So no individual can plan an entire city, but even more, no individual can make such a simple thing as a pencil. Knowledge problems that run through society with basically ignorant or not that well-informed people, and yet still have a flourishing society. How can we deal with this complexity? So in the book we ask three different questions. First, how can a society optimize the use of knowledge? Second, how can we incentivize the use of knowledge in such a way that people would be induced to make their knowledge available to others? And third, how can we produce the knowledge needs for people to coordinate their actions and produce economic and social progress? So if you look closely, there are two distinct problems. On the one hand, we have the incentive problem. We want to have people motivated to produce wealth for others, so that in exchange that they can earn wealth themselves. On the other hand, there is the knowledge problem. Even if we can incentivize people to produce and to contribute to society, how can people know what to produce? What kind of guidance can people have? What kind of feedback mechanisms can we use to make sure that we can inform people on what to produce? And the old classical liberal answer goes back to in its most careful explanation, I think, within Hayek and Mises, and that is the price mechanism. The economist Steve Horowitz, also a friend of SFL, uses the sentence that prices are incentives wrapped in knowledge. That the price mechanism both solves the problem of the incentive problem as well as the knowledge problem. How so? Well, it creates incentives because we have a profit mechanism. When you have a company and you produce something that people like and you make high profits, your profits are a proxy for value added to society. And therefore, when you make high profits, other companies or other entrepreneurs will be attracted to your line of business and will try to compete with you. So it definitely has an incentive. You want to make profits, you got to produce something that consumers want to buy. But it also has a knowledge aspect. When you produce something that people want to buy and when you make high profits, you're communicating to potential competitors, hey, you should be investing in this because this is what people want to buy. So, but it also works the other way around. When you're making losses, you're communicating, hey, I'm doing something wrong, don't do what I do. And it also communicates to yourself, hey, maybe I should stop doing this or I should do something else. So the price mechanism, together with the profit and loss feedback mechanism, is the old classical liberal answer to how can we have a flourishing society if we have a price mechanism. So the market process really is an answer to the so-called knowledge problem. And back in the days, I made this not so funny meme, but Success Kid had a knowledge problem and it solved it by the price mechanism. Because we have a price mechanism, we can have a society that can allow different semi-ignorant people to still cooperate with millions and millions of others, and thereby create a division of labor, specialization, and in short, wealth creation. But how does the knowledge problem relate to political processes? And that's what my friend Martin is going to talk about. Martin?
Okay, so to talk about politics in this, in the light of the knowledge problem, let's just reframe the problem. So we're talking about optimizing the use of knowledge, incentivizing the use of knowledge, and even producing knowledge. Now, when we look at the political process, the first thing we have to talk about is what is the relationship between knowledge and coercion? When we look at politics or the government or the state, what distinguishes politics from other spheres of human interaction is that there is a sense of coercion. That is, the state can force you to buy certain things. Think about healthcare, which is still a hot topic in the US, but even you are obliged to pay taxes. When you don't, that can lead to very big problems for you. And even more so, you can't really choose what kind of things you want, and you'll get the whole package that the government enforces upon you. That is, you get foreign policy, tax policies, marriage laws, drug policies. So in that sense, when you compare it to the market process, in the market process, due to voluntary interaction, knowledge is communicated. In the political process, because it is coercive, a lot of knowledge cannot be communicated. Now, some people and a lot of political scientists will tell you that, well, but we have democracy, and through democracy, through the electoral process, knowledge can actually be communicated. That is to say, whereas in the market system we have the price mechanism that works as a feedback mechanism for knowledge, in the political system we have the electoral system, and that can use as a feedback mechanism. Now, let's think about what we actually communicate when we vote for someone or for a political party, or even in a referendum for a particular position. Now, why do people actually vote for a particular candidate is something that is difficult to know. That is, Lode mentioned that we live in a complex world. Now, things are also cognitively complex. That means that some things are also open to interpretation. Why did someone vote for a particular politician? Is it because they agreed with their whole program, or maybe they agree with one part of their program so much that they just look over the other positions? Maybe they think that a politician is knowledgeable, maybe they think he or she is trustworthy, maybe they just like him, or even people might even vote for someone because they think they are attractive. So that is to say, what kind of knowledge is then used in this process, and can we really consider this as a good system for communicating knowledge and giving feedback to the political process? So that is why libertarians not only talk about the importance of the market process, but also limiting and dividing power. That is to say, even in a democracy, the state needs to be severely limited. We can't just hand over power to the political system to let them still enforce upon us the whole package. and also you need to divide power. Now you can look at this in a system of divided government. People have talked about federal systems, or you could go even further and look at polycentric orders where there's a lot of different centers of decision making. Now the more the centers of decision making there are, the more likely it is that more knowledge will be used.
Thank you, Martin. In closing, we're also going to talk about the third aspect that we talk about in the chapter, which is the rule of law. And the rule of law is a system of law where there are clear and understandable rules that are impartially applied and that create a personal sphere of actions or freedom for every individual. And we talk about this third system a little bit shorter, but it's also important. The economics of prices are only possible, or the price mechanism or market competition are only possible within a framework of private property rules and contractual freedom. Only when you're allowed to make meaningful exchanges within a limited government system is when you can have this flourishing market and therefore the flourishing society. But this economics depends on a system of law where there are clear rules impartially applied that allow for this personal freedom. So, in short, free markets within limited political institutions that create a rule of law system that allows for freedom of interaction can facilitate a cooperative and flourishing society. That's the main conclusion of our essay, which is very short. If we can say so ourselves, we highly recommend it, and we hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening to us, and if you have any questions from us or Dr. Palmer, please shoot.
All right. Within the webinar system, you should be able to raise your hand or type in a question in the chat box, and we will receive that. Thank you again, Lode and Martin, for a great presentation. For the rest of you, if you would like to have a question answered, please go ahead and write it in the chat box or raise your hand. You can also answer our poll while we're at it. We're having a little friendly competition to see who is the best speaker in this webinar. Come on now, the chat looks empty right now. I know you guys have some kind of question. You have something biting at you, something that you must get answered. All right, I do see one question from Mr. Mike Rotish. I will be unmuting you, and you can ask your question to the panelists directly. You are now unmuted, sir. Now, you're going to have to speak a lot louder. We cannot hear you. Well, it seems as if we cannot hear Mr. Rotish well enough to broadcast. We have another question from Art de Weert. I'm going to be unmuting you right now. You are now on.
Hello, I was wondering, considering what Hayek has talked about on the difference between law and legislation, it would be more apt to speak of a rule of legislation rather than a rule of law. Thank you.
Okay, and I guess I can open that up to either Lode and Martin or to Dr. Palmer, so whichever one of you would like to take
it. I could take a crack at it, but do you want to do that first, Lode and Martin?
Not
Okay.
first. Go ahead.
Okay, well, let me just make some comments. It's well-timed as a question because I just flew back from Rome, where I was at a conference of the Istituto Bruno Leoni, which is one of our great European partners on the ideas of Bruno Leoni, who discussed this issue of legislation versus law. And in that context, what we favor is the rule of law, and that if there is a role for legislation, it should be very, very, very limited, and particularly limited to two issues. One is administrative questions about the government as an organization, how is it to be structured and so on. There's a role for legislation in that. And then secondarily, Hayek did think that there was a limited role for legislation to help in the revision or correction of evolved systems of law if they got into a kind of a cul-de-sac. Leoni was much more skeptical about that and thought that, in fact, there are non-legislative or non-state methods for codification and clarification of law. If you read Leoni's wonderful book, Freedom and the Law, which I just reread last 2 weeks, it is very, very eye-opening, and I highly recommend it. Law is not about violence or imposing one solution on another. It's about individuals making claims and a system of law emerging as a consequence. One of the things I realized from rereading Leoni is that law is not something that's bought and sold in the marketplace. In this way, I think that some of the public choice advocates have mischaracterized law. He sees law as analogous to the price system of the market economy that was described by Loda and Martin. Namely, instead of making bids, as we do in the market, which generates market prices, we make claims. Individuals make claims on each other. Those are adjudicated through bodies of judges and jurists and lawyers and public opinion. And the consequence is a system of law that helps to guide our behavior, so that law emerges from the making of claims and counterclaims, just as prices emerge from the bidding in a system of supply and demand. And so that the function of law is to help us to guide our behavior in mutually satisfactory and cooperative ways, rather than to impose preordained solutions on people. So I would make a big distinction, as Leoni does, between law on the one hand, legislation on the other. And if legislation has a role, it's very, very limited and should not be confused with law, which is a cooperative activity, but not a matter of collective choice.
All right, either Lode or Martin, do you have anything to add?
I'm not sure what I could add to that. No, that was a very good summary. I have nothing to add.
Okay, very good. We'll go on to the next question. We have German royalty here on the line, Carlo von Herrnstein. I will go ahead and unmute you for your question, sir. And you are now unmuted.
Very well pronounced, yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask a question about the problem of knowledge. When somebody has never gotten in touch with the problem of knowledge and believes that central entities have all the information needed and the instruments needed to replace the market, what examples do you have? What good, decisive examples do you have to show that there is a problem of knowledge and the market can solve the problem of knowledge when abstract constructs and theories, well, don't help to see the doubt?
So a question for Lode.
That's a good question. I'm a lecturer in microeconomics, and today we had our class on the market process, and I obviously have heavily emphasized the price mechanism. And the way I did it was to basically tell them, every time you make a decision, every time you go to the store and buy something, every time you make a decision on what car to buy, what car not to buy, what music to buy, what music not to buy, every time you make economic decisions like that, you're creating knowledge accessible to others by showing your marginal trade-off. When you buy something, you're showing to others, hey, I'm willing to sacrifice this amount of money for that. Every single decision like that creates knowledge accessible for entrepreneurs. if someone wants to argue that central planning is better, I would focus on the amount of knowledge that is generating by these simple everyday buying and selling actions that are completely absent in a central planning society. In central planning, there is no continuous evaluation by consumers, and there is no continuous estimation by producers to try to make a profit. Like, producers are not constantly trying to adapt to whatever prices they see consumers are paying. I'm not sure if there's really a good and simple example. The way I do it to my students, I usually talk about them either, suppose you're an entrepreneur, how would you make decisions? And suppose you're a consumer, how do you make decisions? But again, in one sense, it will always remain a little bit abstract. And if some people are just too close-minded to open up their eyes to the amount of economic decisions taken every day in a free market, how would you go ahead? How would you make those decisions then? But again, very good question. I hope this helps a bit, but I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Lode. And actually, I see that Carlo might want to respond, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute him. Whether this starts an academic brawl, I am not sure. But Carlo, do you have any comments?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, very good. Not seeing any more comments from Carlo, we shall move to the next person with a question. I believe that is Mr. Nicola Ristic. You are now unmuted. Oh my goodness. Yep, and you are live. Can you hear us, Nicola? Doesn't seem to be working. It's all good. You have one last chance. This is the last call for any of the questions. I see Alex might have a question. I'll go ahead and unmute you as well. Did you happen to have a question for either Dr. Palmer or Lode and Martin?
Yes.
The floor is yours.
I wanted to know how can we lead society to tone down on the faith they have on central planning and faith in institutions of government. How can we lead that change to have society have faith on rational actors like individuals and businesses and enterprises?
So your question is basically, how do we get there? Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, I'll open up the floor to either Dr. Palmer or Lode and Martin.
Well, Alex, let me just make a comment. Alex has asked one of the key questions, which is, how can we help people to understand that they don't need to be ruled by dictators? And I think that there is actually a great deal of movement in the direction of people understanding that they don't need to have dictators create order. It is an ongoing problem because liberalism or libertarianism requires a degree of abstraction and thought that socialists or statists, or whether they're right-wing or left-wing, do not require. They believe that you can just order things to happen. We understand that's not the case. We need to set in motion institutions, processes, and incentives that we hope will yield cooperative and mutually beneficial consequences. So it requires people to think a little bit harder. In a certain sense, classical liberals have a disadvantage. You actually have to think harder to be a classical liberal. Being a socialist or a collectivist is in some sense easy. You just think you can wish things into existence. That said, I think that we have made a great deal of progress, and I think that a greater understanding of such things as market, of explaining these in simple language is possible. It's been remarkably successful. There have been successes in the past, and there will be more in the future. What we need to do is to take the ideas of someone like a Hayek, who's very difficult to understand. As you can tell, he's thinking in German and writing in English and writes very complicated sentences. and put those into everyday simple language that most of our friends and colleagues and family members can understand. That's really one of the challenges of the book, and I do highly recommend the way that this is opened up by Loda and Martin in their essay. They asked some very simple questions about, would you be able to run the lives of all of your neighbors and friends? What if you were asked to make all the decisions for them? Could you do it? And I think that their approach to the issue is really better than most of the economic explanations that are too difficult for most people to grasp. They take important truths and they put them in everyday simple language. It's a real accomplishment. Over to you.
I think that is well answered.
Loda and Martin, would you like to add to that?
No, I don't. I'm not sure what. I think, again, if people ask, I think the most important thing you said was, when people say that we need central planning, then just ask them, who would you select yourself to run your life? And if they can't think of people able to run their lives, why do you think that some people have the knowledge or the motivation to run the whole of society in such a complex manner? The more people can decide for themselves, and for the smaller the level of decision making surrounding less people, the better, I would say. And also within SFL, we have this general recommendation: always learn the best argument and always learn the best way of telling the best arguments. That's what SFL tries to do, and hopefully these kind of webinars and the book that we just published can help people with that.
Okay, thank you very much, Loda. We have to wrap up here, but we have time for one more question on the dial. This time we're going to our German friend. Might this be Danielle on the line? You are unmuted.
I wrote my question at the right. How can the disregardment of the Constitution be avoided?
That is open to anyone.
So the question is how to avoid that when people simply see what the law is and simply disregard it. I do think that we have, in this regard, a little bit of an advantage. And that is when you have clear constitutional principles, whether they're in the German Constitution or the American or Canadian or others, that articulate clear principles that are in accordance with liberty, it's quite possible to make that point. And a lot of people who might not agree with us on other things will understand, gosh, you know, we can't just abandon the law. This idea of a law-governed state has a great deal of appeal that's wider than much of simply our circles of people who are highly educated in the ideas of liberty. And it gives an appeal. To take a very simple example, in the United States and other countries, if someone proposed banning a religion because they think it's a bad idea, all you have to do is say, well, but freedom of religion is enshrined in our law. And for many people, they say, oh, okay, and that ends the discussion. So we have a rhetorical advantage in doing that. Nonetheless, we see many important constitutional principles disregarded on a daily basis. In organizations I work with, we do take them to court. The Institute for Justice and the Cato Institute, organizations in Australia. I was just in South Africa. Herman Mashaba of the Free Market Foundation has instituted a number of important court cases to insist that the law be enforced, and the law quite often is indeed in support of individual liberty. And so going to court is an important part of that procedure, and taking advantage not only of public forums, but going into the courts and insisting on the enforcement of the rule of law is one of the most important tools we have to advance the idea of liberty and the rule of law. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Lode, Martin?
I don't read, nothing to add. Thank you.
Very good. And seeing as we are at the top of the hour, we'll go ahead and end the broadcast there. If you do have any additional questions, you can send them to us. You can use the webinar formula, or also you can send emails to either Lode and Martin or to Mr. Palmer himself. We'll provide that in a follow-up email. And we'll also provide a recording of the broadcast that you can share with your friends. That is the big theme that we would like to push here with Dr. Palmer. Take this book, order this book, go to our website. That is EuropeanStudentsForLiberty.org. You can also find it on studentsforliberty.org/Europe. Find the ESFL Why Liberty books request form. Order this book for your campus. Order it for your student groups, and share it with your friends. Let them see what you've been talking about and raving about. So for everyone else, thank you very much, and I will give the closing word to Dr. Palmer and Lode.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity and the opportunity to interact with you. As someone from a different generation, I really have to say I am so proud of the Students for Liberty, the European Students for Liberty, African Students for Liberty, all over the world, people standing up for justice, for principles of the rule of law, for a society of free and responsible persons. And I am deeply honored to be one of the advisors of this organization. And also, I'm honored to be one of your financial sponsors. And every month, I'm proud that I give money to this organization because I know